Happy Sunday, folks. Time for a weekly update. Last week, obviously, hope everybody had good holidays, not too many political fights over the Thanksgiving or Indigenous Folks Day dinner. The last week, not too much went on, obviously. A lot of people were out of their offices, folks taking the holidays off. And of course, we'll come into another round of that in December, but because of the things going on around mental health, been staying pretty busy on that regard. I did get to attend a city council meeting in Lakeside. The reason I went there for that was they were discussing their wastewater plant, and I had talked with the mayor a little bit ahead of this to get an idea what was going on with what the interactions have been with the Elliott Research Forest Facility coming online and their interactions with the city of Lakeside. Reason I was concerned about that, previously the state had expressed that they wanted to decrease the bill that they were paying to the city of Lakeside because they're not going to have as many people at the facility as they used to. So now that it's not a prison, they're going to have researchers up there currently. There's only about 3 people up there last I knew. 1 person running things, 2 people maintaining and mothballing the facility, essentially making sure it doesn't fall apart while the state figures out what it wants to do with it. Concerning things came out of that, and I've had some separate conversations with folks that are on the advisory committee for that facility. I've gotten the impression that the advisory committee is not being advised of the situation, which is additionally concerning. I'll be reaching out to some folks. But as it stands, last time I brought this up, I mentioned that the plan for the facility was supposed to be done by the contractor by the end of summer. Now, obviously, that didn't happen. The date was extended out to April. In case folks thought it was because of the shutdown, they were supposed to have it done well before the shutdown, and they didn't. Now it's been bumped out to April. We'll see if that stands, because that was the date set before things shut down. I don't know what impact that has. Branching beyond that, I've now found out that it could be 2028, and they will still not know for sure what they're doing with the facility. Reasons for that I can't speculate around very well. Obviously, the state didn't have a great plan for this facility when it shut down the prison that was there. Folks may know that put several $1 million of local contracts went away. A lot of jobs that were family wages went away. One hopes when something like that happens that there is a plan for what comes next. Apparently there was not much of one, which circles back on what I've talked about a couple times before. The state tries to run marathons when it can't run a mile. I'm watching next to me because 2 cats have decided my computer is very warm. So additionally, what the state wants to do to negotiate with Lakeside is they want to cut their sewage bill, which is a large part of Lakeside's plan, by over 80%. So if I remember the numbers right, they've been paying $18,000 a month, and they want to pay under $3,000 a month. That obviously is a problem for the city of Lakeside. They had tried to consult with the state before they designed and started construction on their new plant. They designed it. They wanted to know what the state's going to do, so they knew if they could downsize the project or it was still going to need to be as big as it was. They went with a size that can accommodate the state if they choose to fully utilize that facility again. Now the state's coming in after decisions have been made, after they didn't weigh in so that Lakeside could make decisions appropriate, and telling them no, they want to cut the bill by a massive amount and they'll just hang Lakeside out to dry. That is not an option to me. I've been clear with the folks I've talked to at the state, and I think everybody understands what my position is. A lot of damage was done when the prison was removed to our local economy. It was one of the most successful rehabilitation prisons in the state of Oregon, from what I've understood. It was a desirable facility for inmates because they could have quality of life and a good chance to learn skills so that they could be productive when they got out of prison, which is drastically lacking in the system and now is more lacking because of those decisions. It's not an option to me that the state just hang the city out more and more. They've already damaged the county as a whole. This isn't going to work for me. I've expressed to them in blunt terms, it's a state facility, but it sits on county roads. We can be a good partner or we can be a really bad one. And they need to decide what that's going to be. If they want to be a good partner, we can be good partners. Some of the money from the carbon credit sales needs to stay in the county. It's within our bounds. They have not discussed this as an option. Timber sales, they've argued, will bolster local mills. I haven't received any kind of guarantee that timber will be sold to local mills, so that's not necessarily a benefit for us. It's just resources leaving and not contributing to the local economy. And if they don't hire local companies to do the harvest. So, lots of factors. I appreciated that the advisory committee discussed those when I brought them up in my public testimony at one of their meetings. But as I mentioned, the powers that be do not seem to be communicating with their advisory committee. And from what I've heard, the advisory committee has been reminded multiple times they are only advisory, they do not have say. So that's a bit of a rant on the status of the Elliott, its interplay with Lakeside and the disposition of the state, in its attitude towards collaboration. I've been told in multiple meetings, well, everybody's just got to collaborate. But I look at things like that. That's not collaboration. I've been told local governments need to do more about housing. When I was on the city council in Coos Bay, we made changes to our housing density options, lot line adjustments, zoning changes, SDCs, a number of other things years before the state did. So and surplus land, whereas the state wanted hundreds of thousands of dollars for their surplus land. We did it if somebody could build housing in time. The state is talking about local governments needing to be good partners when they are less of a partner. So that turned into a bit of a rant there. And there will be another one coming up. That was the Elliott. That was wastewater. That was that. Yeah, that takes us to the next rant. Okay. So, mental health. Quiet times give me a chance to go down rabbit holes, which I am wont to do, and look at systems analysis. So my background, my education, is a Bachelor's of Science in Sociology. I don't have a fancy degree, but I do have a degree, and it's in study of sociology. It's between psychology and anthropology. You're looking at, pretty much anything in between the size of an individual and a country. Well, you can look at a country. So, but it comes down to systems. You're looking at the data coming in and the results coming out. So the area folks might be most familiar with that is systemic studies. And within that, folks are probably most familiar with the concept of systemic racism. But it expands well beyond just that aspect. It's a good place to start. If you're looking for a baseline on what a systemic system or study or field of study would be, systemic racism is a place to start. But you also have things around like systemic obesity. What is the system causing it? Is it the inavailability of healthy foods? Is it the pricing of healthy foods relative to food that is bad for you? If bad food is cheaper, well, obesity goes up because people can't afford to be healthy. It's not a matter of restricting those things from being available. It's making sure people have the availability to be healthy. You look at, in terms of economic aspects partnered with healthcare, you can look at the systemic impact of healthcare on bankruptcy. A few years ago, I know I saw a study where medical bills were the leading cause of bankruptcy. I'm sure they still are. Healthcare is very expensive. It hasn't gotten cheaper. And that can roll us into this topic of mental health care in Oregon and the system there. So when I talk about this, it's not about the frontline doctors, it's not about frontline healthcare, it's not line staff, which you think doctor, you don't necessarily think line staff, but the individual doctor is not making policy for the state as a whole. When we look at leadership, we're talking about governor, director of OHA, Oregon Health Authority, director maybe one or two steps below that. It's vice director or whatever they called it, I forget. They've got like 3 vice directors under the main director at OHA. So not talking about doctors, not talking about shift supervisors, CNAs, none of that, but decision makers. And when we look at it, we're not just talking about today, we're talking about going back 2 decades to the blueprint for action around mental health care, 2003, 2004 timeframe to disinvest in facilities and increase investment in local care. And in that report, it cited back to 1988 as being a problem with the mental health system in Oregon. So we're talking generational. So when I'm talking about a problem, I'm talking about the government. Does not necessarily mean the folks in office today, although they are definitely a component of it. They are in a system. And that system has led us to the point we're at in terms of mental health care. We have about 700 beds at the state hospital. Someone told me 2 weeks ago that there are only 200 staffed. I don't know if that's true. It would not surprise me based on some of the data I've seen come out and availability and all that, but it seems real low. But 700 is the number of beds in it. I think it was the PTG study, don't know what it stands for, from the state, cited that they need an additional 3,000 beds of capacity to meet demand. So off the bat, system. Oregon's mental health system does not have capacity, and it is drastically low. And where that comes into play for commissioner work today is the ongoing negotiations around the CFAA, funding for civil commitment aid and assist clients within our community, mental health funding. The state, I've mentioned before, wants to take out, subject to availability of funds from the contract. They want to prioritize the client base that's coming out of the state hospital. They don't word it that way. They say prioritize aid and assist. Those are the folks that are trying to be stabilized to stand trial or assessed to stand trial. That is who's being released prematurely from the state hospital right now. So that is the state hospital's overflow coming to counties and being prioritized with that money, which prevents us from civil commitment or other care so that folks don't enter the criminal justice system. They stay stabilized. Coos County has around 250, 300 truly severe and persistent mentally ill cases, like bad. Not that those people are all dangerous. Probably a handful would be. I've had clients when I worked in mental health that definitely had done some bad things, but most of them not so much. Most of them, folks that are, I would consider so mentally ill, they're not going to take good care of themselves without assistance. Dissociated from reality too far. And that's just Coos County. We got 64,000 people. Oregon has several million. The numbers are big. The money wasn't invested into local communities adequately to meet demand after the 2004 Plan for Action, leading us to today, where the state hospital is so full with very little capacity for demand that we see damage to local hospitals. So I think it was in, there was I want to say it was in the third quarter of a fiscal year 2 or 3 years back. Bay Area Hospital was $1.9 million upside down in the mental health ward. So this was a time frame pretty much only people who have committed crimes were going to the state hospital. Civil commitments were at our hospital here. They've only got 11 or 12 beds, psych beds. When those are full, people are backlogged into the ER. More expensive, takes away capacity for critical issues like heart attacks, strokes, big things, traumatic injuries. And of course, if they don't have that, they don't have this, they don't have somewhere to be, it's an individual on the street trying to stay warm, probably committing trespassings, maybe some thefts, trying to get food, somebody not in their fully right mind to make some informed decisions, and that ends up taking up law enforcement time. Or in the medical case, it takes up first responder time responding to medical emergencies. Had a client at one point I give the example of, he would be in the ER 2 to 3 times a day. He had COPD, living on the street. When he got housing, that dropped to 3 or 4 times a month. Massive savings, not just in money, but in time for law enforcement response if something had happened, first responder, medical, fire, ambulance, saves time at the hospital, in the ER. Massive savings when you have the supports needed, not just in terms of the care for the individual, but in the whole system of our society. So that led us to a why. Why has the state let it get this bad? What is the barrier? Money. Money is obviously a barrier. What is the benefit to the state when we know all these savings happen if you take care of someone? What is the benefit to the state for not taking care of the problem? Well, the problem costs money. One bed at the state hospital, from one of their own studies I was looking at, costs, I want to say, I'd have to pull it up again. It was an amount per 180 days. When I averaged it down, it was around $1,777.78 per day for a bed at the state hospital. Extremely expensive. So, one, if you can cause the bed to not be in the state hospital, it's going to be a lot cheaper for the state. If they provide the money, they're trying to not. They argue that they have to because of a federal order, but they're actively contesting that federal order so that they can hold counties financially responsible if things don't happen, even though they're not guaranteeing us the money to do it. Bit of a tangent. Over $1,700 per bed at the state hospital. Compare it to corrections. State police fact sheet, an adult in custody, it's a new word for an inmate, adult in custody is about $173 per day. And 88 cents. So if somebody was going to go into the state hospital, but they don't get access and they go commit a crime that results in a sentence over 1 year, then the state ends up with that same person, but they've saved $1,600 per day per person. So is it the deliberate intent of the people in power right now to do that? Probably not. But is it a consequence of a system that was made? Did somebody make a financial decision? Or, even without that, is this an externality of a system that exists? That the state saves so much money if somebody is pushed into the criminal justice system rather than receiving care? It's something to look at, something to consider, something I'll be talking with the state about as these negotiations move forward and after these negotiations are finished. Because from what I'm looking at with the data I have available, I've had trouble getting data out of the state directly. I've asked them their plan. If we don't sign this thing, they have no plan. Despite their best assertions at the start. And they've already started throwing some of their junior personnel under the bus. Last time I talked with somebody from OHA, it was somebody high up the chain. They said, well, some of their staff got ahead of themselves. Well, no, because we know that some of those communications were forwarded from the top, from not just OHA's director, but from the governor. So it's, yeah, leadership's already starting to throw some of their junior personnel under the bus. That's a whole separate situation. I've watched the state treat their employees really badly. That is what it is. Carrying on from those numbers, though, you'll notice I cited only if the individual is sentenced to more than 1 year. If they're sentenced to less than a year, so again, petty theft, trespassing, petty theft to get food, trespassing to stay warm, other minor crimes that come for it, even some of the more significant crimes, can result in sentences under 1 year. So what does that mean? Well, that means the state already wasn't paying the $1,700 per day plus, and now they're not going to pay the $173 per day because the individual is going to go to a county jail. The county jail is our general fund. We see that impact earlier this year when we did the point in time count. I talked with Sheriff's Department to get some numbers out of the jail as well. That hadn't been done in the past, but it was something we were able to do this time. I wanted to know homeless in the jail. If I remember right, there were 79 people in the jail that day. It might have been 49, because the cuts had already been made before I got in and before the point in time count was done. So 49-ish people in the jail that day. 11 were homeless, 10 were on mental health meds. So little over a fifth the capacity of the jail was homeless individuals on mental health meds. Individuals who obviously couldn't achieve housing. They needed medical support to function, and they were not receiving care. They were not receiving assistance. They may not have needed to go to the level of the state hospital, but they weren't anywhere other than on the street and severely ill, and I don't recall what their sentences were. Of the total 49 people, 28 were on mental health meds. More than half of the jail's capacity on January 28th, I think it was folks on mental health meds. People that needed help. But because the state doesn't adequately fund the state hospital for some of those people, or additional services at other capacities that would still cost more money, they're going into the criminal justice system, where at a maximum it was going to cost the state $173 per day. But instead, they don't even pay that, and our jail ends up being more than half mental health ward, which, anybody that knows a cop, I've never met a cop who said they wanted to be a psychiatrist so they became a police officer. That is not a thing that happens. And they readily admit these folks should be somewhere that is not the jail. I don't think anybody involved in this system is happy about this situation. These are folks that need help. And instead, because of decisions at the state level, and for whatever reason, the cost of a bed at the hospital being, 10 times as high as being in prison? That's the situation we found ourselves in. And then you get severity. There was a nurse at the hospital ended up with a traumatic brain injury because there was a mentally ill person who was violent and way far out of the scale of the local hospital, and the state hospital would not take them. Just a hair farther down the law enforcement rabbit hole, let's say so many people didn't go to the state hospital, so many people received sentences over 1 year that the state prison system was overwhelmed. What do they do then? Well, we've seen it. It was under our last governor. At one point, there was a mass premature release of individuals who were incarcerated. There have been problems that resulted from that. The reason behind the scenes that happened, from folks in the government I've talked to, is they were nearing capacity to the point they would have had to open another prison as a state, which is expensive. Which, I mean, total tangent, but they wouldn't have had to do that if they left Shutters Creek open, which was very successful at rehabilitating people, but that's not what they did. If the state prison system ends up overwhelmed because of these decisions, all they have to do is what they've already done: another mass release premature. And that is a rabbit hole I went down that I'll be leveraging a bit as I have ongoing conversations with the state. Yeah, always good to end on a bright note. Friday, I'm going to be up in Salem for a local government advisory committee meeting around mental health. The OHA director is going to be there. It's actually a broader meeting than that, but that is going to be a big chunk of what ends up being discussed, because the states had to move back their deadline for us to agree to the contract that doesn't guarantee enough money to care for people and pushes liability onto us. They've had to push their hard deadline back 3 times. We have 36 counties. Not one has signed the agreement. It is not safe for any county to sign the agreement as it stands. We did authorize one that has the specifications we need. So they have something on the table at the state that we will agree to, that protects us from liability, makes sure we have the money we need to do our job. But they haven't signed it, and they say they don't want to. So good for them. Yeah, it'll probably end up in an extension. So, yep, that's the end of it. I'm just rambling on, drinking coffee. Everybody have a good week, and we will talk to you later.